In this video, we explore 15 chilling cases of Japanese women who committed shocking murders. From geishas and housewives to schoolgirls and mothers, each story unveils a hidden darkness behind seemingly ordinary lives. Watch as we uncover their motives, methods, and the legal aftermath that followed. 1. Chisako Kakehi. In Kyoto's serene suburbs, an elderly man sat down to dinner with his new wife. It was late December 2013, and Isao Kakehi had just married 67-year-old Chisako, a charming widow he met through a matchmaking service. He was hopeful, healthy, and ready for a fresh start. By morning, he was dead. Behind her soft-spoken demeanor and silver hair, Chisako Kakehi hid a chilling secret. Over the course of 6 years, 3 men would die after falling in love with her. A 4th would survive, but barely. All of them had one thing in common: trust and substantial life savings. Born in Japan's Saga Prefecture, Chisako lived an ordinary life for decades. She married young, worked in a printing factory, and remained largely unknown to the world. But everything changed after the death of her first husband in 1994. By 2007, she had begun using dating agencies to target elderly men, those living alone with money and looking for companionship. Her method was disturbingly simple. She'd earn her victims' trust, often moving in or discussing marriage. Then, at the perfect moment, she would slip cyanide into their food or medicine disguised as health supplements. The poison acted quickly. The victims collapsed, gasping for air, often dying before help could arrive. Toshiaki Suehiro was the first. In December 2007, just after lunch, he collapsed on the street. He survived, but was left permanently disabled. He died a year later of unrelated causes. Then came Masanori Honda, a fit 71-year-old, who lost consciousness while riding his motorcycle in 2012. His death was ruled natural until investigators began to connect the dots. In 2013, Minoru Hioki, a cancer survivor, fell for Chisako's affection. In an email he wrote, he wanted to stay together forever. A month later, after dinner with her, he was dead. Just weeks after Hioki's passing, Chisako married her final victim, Isao Kakehi. She poisoned him the same way under the guise of a meal shared between husband and wife. When medics arrived, she lied, claimed he had no family, no chance, and then she refused resuscitation. This time, authorities were suspicious. An autopsy revealed lethal cyanide in Isao's system. Soon after, police searched her home and found empty supplement capsules and a buried bag of cyanide in a discarded flower pot. In 2014, Chisako Kakehi was arrested. During the trial, prosecutors painted a picture of calculated greed. Kakehi had gained millions from inheritances and life insurance. Her defense argued dementia. But the evidence meticulously planned poisonings, multiple romantic partners, at once spoke of a cold, deliberate pattern. In 2017, she was sentenced to death. She appealed, but the ruling stood. Now, in her late 70s, she sits on death row. No execution date has been set. Japan called her the Black Widow, but the court called her something simpler, a murderer who disregarded human life for personal gain. And while she once claimed to love each of her victims, her chilling words still echo from the courtroom. Even if you reflect on it, your sins will not go away. It will not reach the dead. 2. Kao Kobayashi. In post-war Japan, amid the ashes of economic recovery, a woman named Kao Kobayashi built herself up from hardship. Born in 1908 in rural Saitama, she came from a poor farming family and began working as a housekeeper at just 16. Life offered little comfort. Her marriage to Hiroko Hayashi, a sickly man with failing health, was a struggle of survival. But behind her perseverance was a growing hunger for love, control, and eventually power. By the early 1950s, Kobayashi had tasted both business success and romantic betrayal. She was running a small shop and involved in the black market, but what consumed her most was her relationship with a younger police officer, Mataichiro Nakamura. After her husband's sudden death in 1952, officially blamed on a cerebral hemorrhage, Nakamura moved in with her. Suspicion lingered, but no charges were filed. When Nakamura eventually left her for a younger woman, Kobayashi didn't let go. She clung to him obsessively, even attempting to poison his new wife, according to later court testimony. Then came Shiobara. In 1956, Kobayashi relocated to the onsen town, hoping to transform her growing wealth into a hospitality empire. She began acquiring land and shops, working toward her dream of owning a hotel. But locals resisted, and one family stood directly in her path, the Ikukata's, owners of the struggling Hotel Nihonkaku. By early 1960, she had made her move. Offering to loan money to the Ikukatas, she was rejected by the wife Ume. Enraged, Kobayashi turned to a younger man, Mitsuyoshi Onuki, offering cash and intimacy in exchange for murder. On February 8th, Ume Ikukata was strangled in her sleep by Onuki. Her body was buried beneath the hotel's boiler room and sealed with concrete. The town whispered of her disappearance, but no evidence surfaced yet. Months later, Kobayashi returned with another plan: eliminate Kamasuke Ikukata, the husband. An attempt to poison his food with acid failed when the taste raised suspicion. On New Year's Eve 1960, while watching television, Kobayashi quietly moved behind him and began to strangle him. Onuki joined, stabbing Kamasuke in the neck to finish the act. When guests asked about the missing owners, they calmly replied, "He went to Tokyo on business." But the whispers grew louder. As journalists caught wind of the mystery, pressure mounted. On February 20th, 1961, both Kobayashi and Onuki were arrested. In custody, Kobayashi confessed not only to the Ikukata murders, but also to poisoning her husband 8 years earlier, allegedly with help from Nakamura. The trial gripped Japan. On July 14, 1966, both Kobayashi and Onuki were sentenced to death. Nakamura, maintaining his innocence, was acquitted due to lack of evidence. Kao Kobayashi was executed by hanging in 1970 at the age of 61. To this day, her story is remembered not just for the lives she took, but for the cold ambition that drove her. In her final words, she reportedly asked only for a cigarette, offering no apology, no remorse. A woman once overlooked by life, she ensured no one would overlook her in death. 3. Sachiko Eto, born in Sukagawa, Fukushima on August 21, 1947. Sachiko Eto once lived a quiet life. A door-to-door cosmetics seller and a follower of minor local faiths, she later declared herself a self-professed guru with psychic powers. Over time, she drew a devoted circle of followers who believed in her prophetic vision and shared her fate. Psychologists noted Eto's claims of divine authority, and some observers described her leadership style as coercive. She claimed to purge evil spirits, but in practice wielded fear and control over her inner circle. From December 1994 through June 1995, Eto oversaw a series of disturbing rituals. She and her followers, her daughter Yuko 23, Hiroshi Namoto 21, and Mitsuo Sekin 45 identified certain members deemed ugly devils. Under her direction, victims were repeatedly beaten with Japanese taiko drumsticks during exorcism ceremonies. Slowly and methodically, 6 followers died. One survivor eventually alerted authorities after suffering severe injuries during these ceremonies. Suspicions rose until July 5, 1995, when Fukushima Prefectural Police conducted a search of Ito's home. In hidden rooms, they discovered 6 decomposed bodies. Sachiko Eto and her 3 accomplices were arrested on the spot. Later, the surviving cult member was also taken into custody. During trial, prosecutors argued that Eto inflicted these deaths under the guise of religion, but really to assert dominance. One prosecutor summarized, she tried to make herself a deified ruler and killed people who threatened her authority. List of victims included her own daughter's romantic rival and longtime followers who questioned her control. Her defense claimed she lacked murderous intent and believed exorcisms were sacred, but the court found her crimes too calculated, too cruel to excuse. In November 2001, the Fukushima District Court recommended a death sentence for Eto. Routine accomplices received life imprisonment or long terms. By May 2002, after psychiatric evaluation, Eto's death sentence was confirmed. Appeals followed. In 2005, the Sendai High Court refused her appeal. In September 2008, the Supreme Court dismissed her final plea. She became the 10th woman in post-war Japan to receive capital punishment. On September 27, 2012, at Miyagi Prison in Sendai Sachiko, Eto was executed by hanging at age 65. The first female prisoner executed in Japan in 15 years. Her daughter and one cult member remain imprisoned for life. Her crimes left a chilling legacy. The drumstick killer case exposed how belief can be twisted into brutality. It raised questions about cult influence, psychological manipulation, and unchecked charisma. In court, Eto reportedly stated, "I did it as part of a religious service. I never thought they were going to die." Sachiko Eto's legacy reminds us of the danger posed by those who claim spiritual power and the vulnerability of followers eager for meaning. In the quiet streets of Tsukagawa, a self-styled prophet became a killer and left behind 6 lives silenced in the name of salvation. 4. Sada ABE, Tokyo, 1936. In a quiet inn tucked away in the Ogu district, a man lay dead, strangled in his sleep. On the surface, it seemed like a crime of passion. But what followed would plunge Japan into one of the most bizarre and infamous true crime cases in its history. Her name was Sada ABE. Born in 1905 to a respected tatami mat maker's family, she grew up in Tokyo's Kanda district. From an early age, Sada was rebellious, drawn to glamour and freedom. But after being sexually assaulted at 15, her path shifted dramatically. She was sold into a geisha house, then drifted into prostitution, first licensed, then not. By the early 1930s, her life was shaped by survival, betrayal, and fleeting intimacy. In February 1936, she met Kichizo Ishida, a successful restaurant owner and notorious womanizer. Their affair began fast and burned intensely. What started as a casual romance quickly turned into something else. Sada, lonely and emotionally volatile, felt consumed by him. In her own words, "I had never met such a sexy man." For weeks, they disappeared into love hotels across Tokyo, indulging in alcohol, intimacy, and endless physical encounters. As the affair deepened, so did Sada's obsession. She began to fear losing Ishida to other women, particularly his wife. She told police later, "If I killed him, no other woman could ever touch him again." On May 18, 1936, after 2 days of intense intimacy, Sada wrapped her kimono sash around Ishida's neck and strangled him as he slept. But it didn't end there. She severed his genitals, wrapped them in paper, and carved her name into his skin. Then calmly, she got dressed and walked out, telling the inn staff not to disturb him. For 3 days, Sada disappeared. Japan panicked. Newspapers dubbed it the Sada ABE incident, and the manhunt became a national obsession. Sightings were reported across the country. On May 20th, police finally found her resting in an inn, with Ishida's remains still in her possession. She confessed immediately, saying, "I am Sada ABE." At her trial, she pleaded guilty. The judge, acknowledging her mental state and Ishida's own involvement, sentenced her to 6 years in prison, a surprisingly lenient term. She was released in 1941. After prison, Sada lived in the shadows, changing names and trying to escape her past. But Japan never forgot her. Her story became myth, echoing in books, plays, and films, most famously in the Realm of the Senses. Scholars debated whether she was a symbol of female rebellion or a tragic figure driven by trauma and obsession. Sada ABE was last seen in 1970. Her final years remain a mystery. Her legacy, however, endures. She wasn't just remembered for what she did, but for how a nation responded. In a time of rising political tension, the tale of a woman who killed for love captivated Japan and blurred the line between crime and legend. 5. Suzuka HATAKEYAMA, Fujisato, Akita Prefecture. A peaceful rural town until the spring of 2006, when two children disappeared within weeks of each other. Behind the curtains of neighborly trust and quiet roads, a horrifying truth unraveled. And at the center of it all stood one woman, Suzuka HATAKEYAMA. Born in 1973, HATAKEYAMA lived alone with her 9-year-old daughter Ayaka in a close-knit community where everyone knew everyone. Outwardly, she was reserved, perhaps a little isolated, but nothing alarming. Beneath that, however, was a woman struggling with deep emotional instability, resentment, jealousy, and perhaps a longing for control in a life she felt slipping away. On April 9, 2006, her daughter Ayaka vanished. The next day, her body was discovered in the Fujikoto River. Initially deemed an accident, the case raised few suspicions. But HATAKEYAMA's own behavior did. She rejected the idea of a drowning, insisting her daughter hated cold water and would never play by the river. She even began questioning neighbors, launching her own investigation. At first, she appeared as a grieving mother, desperate for answers. But within a month, another child would go missing, and this time the community's suspicions would turn inward. On May 17, 7-year-old Goken Yoneyama, a cheerful boy and Ayaka's classmate, disappeared on his way home. His body was found the next day, strangled and left by the riverbank. Unlike Ayaka's case, there was no mistaking the cause. This was murder. The investigation quickly closed in on HATAKEYAMA. She lived just 2 houses away from Goken and had been one of the last adults seen near him. Forensics soon revealed damning evidence. Fibers from Goken's clothing matched those in her car. Traces of his blood were discovered near the entrance of her home and even inside the room once occupied by her daughter. On June 4th, HATAKEYAMA was arrested. Days later, she confessed. She admitted to strangling Goken with a cord and dumping his body by the river. Her motive, however, stunned investigators. She claimed she wanted to divert suspicion away from herself regarding her daughter's death. In another chilling explanation, she said she wanted the 2 children to be together in death, as they used to play together in life. The court rejected any claim of diminished capacity. While the murder of Ayaka was ruled intentional, the court concluded that Goken's killing was not premeditated, but instead born of sudden jealousy and rage. She had seen the boy playing happily and, overwhelmed by emotion, acted. On March 19, 2008, Suzuka HATAKEYAMA was sentenced to life in prison. Her crimes shook the country, not only for their brutality, but for how they unfolded in such a quiet place, carried out by someone hiding in plain sight. In a courtroom packed with thousands of citizens, HATAKEYAMA offered a deep bow to Goken's parents and whispered, "I'm sorry I took your son." But by then, no apology could undo what had been done. Today, she remains behind bars. But in Fujisato, memories of those 2 children and the darkness hidden behind a mother's silence still linger. 6. Masumi Hayashi. It was a summer festival meant to bring the community together. Families gathered, children laughed, and the scent of curry filled the air. But by the end of the night, on July 25th, 4 people were dead, and over 60 others were fighting for their lives. The poison had already done its work. What no one knew then was that the killer wasn't a stranger, she was one of their own. Masumi Hayashi, born in 1961, was a mother of 4 and a former insurance saleswoman in the quiet city of Wakayama, Japan. She appeared ordinary, but behind closed doors, her life was marked by resentment, financial struggles, and a history of suspicious insurance claims. Her husband worked as a termite exterminator, giving them easy access to arsenic, a lethal substance that would become central to one of Japan's most notorious mass poisonings. That day, a large pot of communal curry was being prepared for the Sonobe district's summer celebration. At some point during its preparation, at least 1,000 grams of arsenic enough to kill over 100 people were added. As festival-goers ate, symptoms set in rapidly nausea, seizures, and collapse. In the chaos, 4 lives were lost, including 2 respected local officials and 2 children, one just 10 years old. Suspicion quickly turned to Hayashi. Witnesses recalled seeing her alone with the curry pot. Chemical analysis later confirmed the arsenic used in the curry matched what was found at her home, the same compound her husband stored for his pest control work. A pattern began to emerge. Investigators uncovered 3 prior cases where Hayashi had allegedly attempted to poison others, including her own husband, all linked to insurance payouts. She and her husband had even staged accidents to collect fraudulent claims totaling over 150 million yen. Arrested in October 1998, Hayashi maintained her innocence. No direct evidence tied her to the crime, no confession, but the weight of circumstantial proof was crushing. A high school girl testified she saw Hayashi pacing like a bear near the curry. Experts testified that only Hayashi had the opportunity and the motive. In 2002, the Wakayama District Court sentenced her to death by hanging, calling the crime cold-blooded and indiscriminate. Appeals followed. In 2005, the Osaka High Court upheld the verdict, and in 2009, Japan's Supreme Court rejected her final appeal, sealing her fate. The case stunned the nation. It sparked a wave of copycat poisonings and ignited debates about media influence, capital punishment, and how such darkness could hide behind the face of a neighbor. To this day, Masumi Hayashi remains on death row. Her story serves as a chilling reminder sometimes the greatest threat doesn't come from the shadows, but from those who blend in just long enough to betray the trust of an entire community. In the words of the presiding judge, there was no one else with both the opportunity and the means. Only she could have done it. 7. Miyuki Ishikawa. In the shadows of post-war Tokyo, while Japan struggled to rebuild from ruin, a quiet horror unfolded behind the doors of a maternity hospital. What began as desperation soon turned into one of the deadliest killing sprees in Japanese history, hidden in plain sight. Miyuki Ishikawa, born in 1897 in Miyazaki Prefecture, was a woman of education and authority. A graduate of the prestigious University of Tokyo, she became a midwife and eventually the director of the Kotobuki Maternity Hospital. She held a respected position in society, one trusted to usher in new life. But beneath that title lay a chilling secret. From 1944 to 1948, Ishikawa oversaw the deaths of over 100 newborns, possibly as many as 169. Her method was not direct violence, but calculated neglect. She allowed babies to die slowly, untreated, unfed, and unloved. Most were born to parents who were poor, unmarried, or desperate. To Ishikawa, their lives were already condemned by circumstance. She later claimed she had no choice. Japan had no social safety nets. The hospitals were overwhelmed, and the country was broken. But instead of seeking solutions, she made herself one. She let the infants perish, then demanded payment from parents afterward, framing it as a service. With the help of her husband, Takeshi Ishikawa, and an accomplice doctor who falsified death certificates, she created a system of quiet elimination. The authorities turned a blind eye until the bodies could no longer be ignored. On January 12, 1948, 2 officers from the Waseda police station stumbled upon the remains of 5 infants. Autopsies revealed they had not died of natural causes. Just 3 days later, Miyuki was arrested. As police expanded the investigation, they uncovered a grim trail, dozens more bodies hidden in a mortician's house and within temple grounds. The true scale of the deaths was staggering and tragically uncertain. In court, Ishikawa tried to shift the blame. She argued the parents had abandoned their children and that she merely allowed nature to take its course. Some members of the public even sympathized, but the court saw through it. In the Tokyo District Court, she was sentenced to 8 years in prison, though her term was later reduced to 4 by the Tokyo High Court. Her husband and the doctor received lighter sentences. The lightness of the punishment sparked outrage. Writer Kenji Yamamoto would later call the case unbelievable and unbearable. But from this darkness came change. The case forced Japan to confront a painful truth: there were no protections for unwanted children, or for the desperate women who bore them. In response, Japan passed the Eugenic Protection Law in 1948, which legalized abortion for economic hardship and introduced stricter regulation of midwives. Miyuki Ishikawa's name faded from public memory, but her crimes reshaped Japanese policy. Known as the Oni Sanba, the demon midwife, her case remains a haunting reminder of what happens when society abandons its most vulnerable and when those entrusted with care become silent executioners. 8. Kanae Kijima. In the quiet suburbs of Japan, behind wedding veils and online profiles, Kanae Kijima appeared to be a woman searching for love. But in 2009, she became the face of a chilling case that shocked the nation. Known as the Konkatsu killer, Kijima used dating sites not to find a husband, but to find her next victim. Born in 1974, Kijima was described as charming, persuasive, and calculating. On matchmaking platforms, she painted herself as an elegant, cultured woman, an accomplished cook, a music student, and sometimes even a nurse. But her carefully curated persona concealed a darker truth. What she truly pursued was money, and the men who trusted her paid the ultimate price. Between January and August 2009, 3 men, Hideki Maruyama 53, Keizo Ando 80, and Yoshiyuki Oida 41, were all found dead under suspiciously similar circumstances. Each appeared to have died by suicide using carbon monoxide from charcoal briquettes. But something didn't add up. All 3 had recently transferred large sums of money to Kijima. All 3 had traces of sleeping pills in their systems. And all 3 had believed they were about to start a new life with her. Yoshiyuki Oida had written on his blog just a day before his death at 41, "I'm finally looking forward to getting married." He was found in his car, poisoned, the keys missing, and Kijima had just received 5 million yen from him. Keizo Ando wheelchair-bound, and 80 died in a house fire after Kijima was seen leaving his home and withdrawing from his bank account. Hideki Maruyama was found face down in a stream, drugged and lifeless. When police searched her Tokyo apartment on November 3, 2009, they discovered a trove of prescription drugs, some from over 10 different doctors. A mortar and pestle bore the same sleeping medication found in her victims. Though she denied all charges, the pattern was too precise to ignore. Prosecutors alleged she used sedatives to disable her victims before staging suicides using charcoal stoves, a method disturbingly common in Japan. Kijima's trial was one of the longest in Japanese lay judge history, stretching over 100 days. Despite no confession and no direct witnesses, the Saitama District Court ruled that the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. On April 13, 2012, Kanae Kijima was sentenced to death. The presiding judge stated she committed these crimes for selfish purposes and showed no remorse. To this day, she remains on death row, her appeals exhausted. At least 3 other deaths have been linked to her, including one man who drowned under suspicious circumstances and another who died in a supposed fishing accident. Kijima's story is more than a tale of betrayal. It's a case that forced Japan to reckon with the dangers of online relationships, the vulnerability of the lonely, and how charm can mask cold calculation. Behind her soft-spoken demeanor and carefully crafted lies was a predator willing to take lives in exchange for luxury. The Konkatsu killer didn't just steal hearts, she extinguished lives. 9. Hiroko Nagata. In the winter of 1972, deep in the snow-covered mountains of Gunma Prefecture, Japan witnessed one of its darkest and most chilling moments of political extremism. At the center of it stood Hiroko Nagata, a former pharmacy student turned revolutionary, whose devotion to ideology spiraled into cold-blooded violence. Born in 1945 in Tokyo, Nagata was a product of Japan's turbulent post-war years. At university, she abandoned her pharmaceutical studies to join the swelling tide of leftist student movements. She wasn't alone. Across the country, young radicals were turning against what they saw as a corrupt Western-aligned government. But Nagata's transformation went further than most. In time, she became vice chairman of the United Red Army, a radical group bent on revolution at any cost. By early 1972, police crackdowns had driven the group underground. Nagata, alongside Chairman Tsuneo Mori, retreated with other members to a remote training compound in the mountains. It was there that paranoia, fear, and a fanatical pursuit of ideological purity exploded into a deadly purge. Over the course of just a few weeks, 14 people were killed, not by the government, but by their own comrades. The methods were brutal. Some were beaten to death, others tied to trees and left to freeze in sub-zero temperatures. The reasons: alleged lack of revolutionary zeal, minor infractions, or simply asking for a tissue. Nagata especially targeted women, often accusing them of distracting the men from the cause. One former member later described her as someone who worked herself into a hysterical rage over perceived disloyalty. It was ideological madness masked as discipline, and it turned a movement into a massacre. The killings came to light when police arrested Nagata and several others on February 16, 1972. 5 members had fled the camp days earlier, sparking the Asama Sanso incident, a violent standoff with police that gripped the nation. When the truth of the purge emerged, Japan was horrified. Nagata stood trial in Tokyo District Court and was sentenced to death on June 18, 1982. Her appeals were exhausted over the next decade. Yet despite the sentence, she remained on death row for nearly 30 years, a symbol of a movement that had long since crumbled. In prison, Nagata wrote books and attracted a small group of sympathizers who viewed her as a scapegoat for a generation's failed revolution. But public opinion never softened. For many, her name was synonymous with betrayal of justice, of trust, and of human decency. Her final years were spent bedridden, battling brain cancer, until she died in custody on February 5, 2011, just days before her 66th birthday. The legacy she left behind is not one of revolution, but of warning about how idealism, when unmoored from humanity, can become indistinguishable from cruelty. In the words of one observer, "Back then, it didn't matter what you believed, just that you believed it absolutely." For Hiroko Nagata, that absolute belief ended in death, not only her own, but that of the very comrades she once vowed to fight beside. 10. Kayoko NAKAI. In the shadowed corners of Kobe's entertainment industry, competition was fierce and sometimes deadly. On March 2, 2000, firebombs ripped through 2 branches of a telephone dating club called Rin Rin House. The flames left 4 customers dead and several others injured. But this was no accident. It was arson ordered by a woman desperate to eliminate her rivals. Kayoko Nakai, born in 1941, was a former operator of her own telephone dating club. Soft-spoken and nearing her 60s, at the time she hardly fit the profile of a cold-blooded conspirator. Yet behind the scenes, prosecutors say she masterminded a violent scheme to destroy a competitor who was quickly overtaking her in the industry. Her motive: business, survival, and revenge. As Rin House expanded aggressively into Kobe's Chuo ward, Nakai watched her clientele dwindle. She turned to Akihiro Sakamoto, a 47-year-old known for drug trafficking and connections to organized crime. Together, they devised a plan: disrupt Rin House by any means necessary. In the early hours of March 2nd, Sakamoto and accomplices hurled Molotov cocktails into 2 outlets. The fire spread fast. 4 men trapped inside died from carbon monoxide poisoning. Several others escaped with injuries, but the damage was done. The case went cold for years. With few witnesses and a lack of physical evidence tying Nakai directly to the crime, police struggled to build a case. But behind the scenes, the investigation quietly continued. In 2006, 6 years after the attack, Nakai was arrested. She denied everything. There was, she claimed, no proof she had ever ordered the arson, let alone intended for anyone to be harmed. But prosecutors painted a different picture, one of a woman's, who offered large sums of money to criminal associates to carry out a targeted attack, fully aware of the danger it posed. The trial, held at the Kobe District Court, gripped the public. Prosecutors pushed for the death penalty, calling the crime premeditated and heinous. But in the end, the court took a more nuanced view. Judge Makoto Okada ruled that Nakai had intended to sabotage a rival, not murder. While her actions were undeniably reckless and criminal, the judge said her intent to kill had not been clearly proven. On November 27, 2007, Kayoko Nakai was sentenced to life in prison. The case stands as a stark reminder of how far ambition and desperation can push someone. A business rivalry escalated into a coordinated attack that cost innocent lives. Nakai, now in her 80s, remains behind bars. Her accomplices, including Sakamoto, also received lengthy sentences. In the aftermath, the world of telephone dating clubs in Japan began to face stricter regulation, and the Rin House tragedy became a cautionary tale. Behind the glowing signs and whispered conversations, darker forces had been at work, and 4 lives were lost to a crime that began not with hate, but with competition. 11. Junko Ogata. In the quiet city of Kurume, Fukuoka Prefecture, Junko Ogata was once known as a kind-hearted preschool worker, raised in privilege and destined for a peaceful life. But her path veered darkly in 1982, when she reconnected with a charming and manipulative former classmate, Futoshi Matsunaga. That relationship would erase nearly every trace of the woman she once was. Under Matsunaga's influence, Junko transformed. He was controlling, violent, and masterful in psychological manipulation. Isolated and abused, she slowly lost her autonomy. By the time the killings began in 1996, she was no longer just a victim, she was a participant. Between 1996 and 1998, 7 people were murdered, including Junko's own parents, sister, brother-in-law, and 2 children, her nephew and niece. The couple lured their victims to an apartment in Kitakyushu using lies, guilt, and coercion. Inside, the horrors unfolded: electric shocks, starvation, strangulation. Their motive was often money, but the method was cruelty. Matsunaga was the orchestrator, but Junko carried out his orders. Victims were sometimes forced to take part in the killings of others before they too were murdered. Bodies were dismembered, boiled, and their remains destroyed or dumped at sea. No human remains were ever recovered. All that remained were the testimonies of two survivors, one woman who escaped, and Kumio Taraya's daughter, who had watched her father die. The murders remained hidden until 2002, when that young girl, then 17, escaped once more and alerted police. Her testimony cracked the case wide open. On March 6, 2002, Matsunaga and Junko were arrested. Junko admitted her involvement, but said Matsunaga's abuse had broken her spirit and mind. In 2005, the Fukuoka District Court sentenced both to death by hanging, but Junko appealed. Her defense argued she was under complete psychological control, a woman who had lost her will. In 2007, the High Court accepted that argument, in part commuting her sentence to life in prison. Matsunaga's death sentence was upheld. The case was extraordinary, not only for its brutality, but for its lack of physical evidence. No remains, no forensic trails, only the raw, painful memories of survivors and Junko's own confessions. The court believed her not because she pleaded innocence, but because she spoke of her guilt in precise, harrowing detail. Today, Junko Ogata remains imprisoned, serving life for crimes she once claimed she had no choice but to commit. Her story forces an uncomfortable question: how far can someone be pushed before they lose the ability to say no? The Kitakyushu serial murder incident remains one of Japan's darkest modern crimes. It exposed how manipulation, silence, and fear can turn a home into a prison and a partner into an executioner. As one judge said during sentencing, without comparison in the criminal history of our country, and for many it's a story too haunting to forget. 12. Yoarashi OKINU. She was called Yoarashi Night Storm, a name whispered in the alleys of Edo long after her death. But before the scandal and execution, Okinu was simply Harada Kinu, a girl born in the mid-1800s, either to a samurai or a fisherman's family, depending on which tale you believe. What we know for certain is that poverty forced her into the world of geisha, a life of beauty performance and quiet survival. Okinu's allure was legendary. In an era where power and privilege dictated one's fate, she rose through charm and intelligence, eventually becoming the mistress of a nobleman, Okubo Tadayori, lord of the Karasuyama domain. She bore him a son. But as the Meiji Restoration swept away the old order, so too was Okinu cast aside. The child of a fallen woman had no place in a reshaped Japan. Heartbroken and abandoned, she began a new chapter with Kobayashi Kinpei, a prosperous man. But their relationship would soon dissolve in betrayal. In 1871, Okinu met Arashi Rikaku, a kabuki actor with charisma and ambition. She fell hard and fast. To be with him, she would do the unthinkable. On March 2, 1871, Kobayashi Kinpei was found dead, poisoned. The motive was clear: to free herself for Rikaku. But their plans unraveled quickly. The lovers were arrested soon after, allegedly, while Rikaku was mid-performance on stage. In a twist of irony, the actor famed for playing tragic roles became part of a real-life tragedy. During interrogation, Okinu remained calm. She was pregnant at the time of her sentencing, which postponed her execution. Meanwhile, Rikaku's death sentence was commuted to just 3 years in prison. He would later return to the stage, reborn as Ichikawa Gonjuro, his past, though not forgotten, shadowed behind a new name. Okinu was not so fortunate. On March 28, 1872, she was led to the execution grounds at Kozukapara. Her head was severed by sword and displayed publicly, a message to any woman who dared defy societal roles. She was 27. Her story didn't end with her death. Newspapers and sensational novels transformed her into a dokufu, a poisonous woman, a seductress who used beauty as a weapon. The press painted her as a she-devil, a cautionary tale of ambition and passion unchecked. But the historical truth is far less clear. Was Okinu a cold-blooded killer or a desperate woman trying to reclaim her agency in a world designed to deny it? Some historians argue her infamy was shaped as much by fiction as fact. In later years, tales emerged of her becoming a Buddhist nun, her name changed, her past buried. But these too may be myth echoes of a society unsure whether to pity her, revile her, or remember her at all. Yoarashi Okinu's case faded from headlines, but she became one of Japan's earliest media-fueled true crime legends, a reminder of how quickly desire, desperation, and betrayal can turn a woman into a storm. 13. Miyoko SUMIDA. In the industrial city of Amagasaki, Japan, a quiet storm of horror was unfolding behind closed doors. Its center, a 64-year-old woman named Miyoko SUMIDA. To outsiders, she was a retired bar owner, a grandmother, even a neighbor. But to those who entered her home and never left, she was something else entirely. SUMIDA was the matriarch of what the Japanese media would later call the piranha family, a web of relatives and loyal followers who carried out beatings, starvation, and murders under her control. Her motive: money, insurance payouts, pension benefits, and sometimes pure domination. Between 2003 and 2011, at least 6 people died at the hands of this group, though some estimates suggest the true toll may be higher. Victims ranged from family friends to her own husband, who accidentally fell off a cliff during a group photo in Okinawa. The payout, 90 million yen and a cleared mortgage. Their methods were chilling in their cruelty. Victims were often confined in sheds or rooms within SUMIDA's condominium, denied food and water, beaten into submission, or psychologically manipulated until their deaths. Their bodies were found years later, some wrapped in blankets, others sealed in concrete-filled steel drums. It wasn't just the brutality of the murders that stunned the nation. It was the orchestration. SUMIDA didn't act alone. Her sister-in-law, daughter-in-law, cousin, and even her son were all complicit. This wasn't a lone predator. It was a coordinated operation of fear and control operating under a veneer of family ties. Authorities began to connect the dots when a tip came in: too many people associated with SUMIDA had mysteriously disappeared. The discovery of Kazuko Oe's body in a concrete drum in 2011 cracked the case open. Soon more remains surfaced under floorboards in warehouses and in harbors. Each revelation was more grotesque than the last. On December 5, 2011, Miyoko SUMIDA was arrested. The charges: murder, abuse, and unlawful confinement. While in custody, SUMIDA confessed, "I'm to blame for everything." But she wouldn't face justice in court. Just a year later, on December 12, 2012, she was found dead in her cell. Despite being on suicide watch, she had choked herself, silencing the central figure in one of Japan's most disturbing crime rings. The legacy of the piranha family forced Japan to reckon with a new and uncomfortable truth: elderly crime was rising, and familial abuse could be just as dangerous as any organized gang. It exposed cracks in the social fabric: isolation, greed, and the fading safety net for vulnerable citizens. To this day, the true number of SUMIDA's victims remains uncertain. But what's clear is this: behind the facade of a modest life, a nightmare festered, a world where trust was a trap and family became the perfect weapon. 14. Nevada Tan. It was June 1, 2004, a quiet lunch hour at Okubo Elementary School in Sasebo, Japan. 2 6th-grade classmates stepped into an empty classroom. Moments later, one would leave covered in blood. The other 12-year-old, Satomi Mitarai, would never walk out again. The killer was just 11 years old. Her name remains protected by law, known only as Girl A. But the world would come to recognize her as Nevada Tan, a nickname born from a class photo where she wore a University of Nevada sweatshirt, an image that would soon be burned into the memory of a nation. Girl A was on the surface a typical student, curious, shy, and once socially active. But in the months before the murder, something had changed. She withdrew from her clubs, became fixated on horror media and dark online subcultures. Her personal website hinted at a fascination with the macabre, violent flash animations, unsettling art, and fictional recipes, with names like Curse of the Purple Skull. But none of it prepared the country for what she would do. That day, Girl A lured Satomi into the empty room, reportedly under the pretense of resolving a personal conflict. The argument, hurtful comments, left online criticisms about her weight, and accusations of being a goody-goody. In a flash of uncontrollable rage, she attacked. With a box cutter, she slit Satomi's throat and arms, leaving her classmate to bleed to death. Then she calmly walked back to her classroom, blood still on her clothes. When confronted, her words were hauntingly simple. "I did a bad thing. I'm sorry, I'm sorry." She cried in custody, refused to eat, and confessed. The motive, a digital insult. The line between virtual and real had been crossed with irreversible consequences. The response was immediate and intense. Public mourning swept through Sasebo. Satomi's death shattered the illusion of childhood innocence, and once again ignited a fierce debate: should Japan lower the age of criminal responsibility even further? At just 11, Girl A was far below the threshold for criminal prosecution. But the severity of her crime could not be ignored. On September 15, 2004, a family court ruled for her involuntary commitment. She was sent to a reformatory in Tochigi, her identity still shielded. 2 years later, her term was extended. But by 2008, authorities chose not to detain her further. While Satomi's family grieved in silence, something strange happened online. Girl A's image, particularly that sweatshirt, became an internet meme. Artists reimagined her as a cartoon character, wide-eyed, smiling, wielding a box cutter. Nevada tan became a bizarre cultural artifact, a symbol not of crime but of how tragedy can be warped in the digital age. What began as a personal argument ended in a national reckoning. The Sasebo slashing wasn't just a tragedy, it was a warning about the power of words, the fragility of youth, and the growing shadows that can form when real life and online worlds collide. 15. Zheng YONGSHAN. On the morning of February 17, 2006, a quiet town in Japan's Shiga prefecture awoke to one of the most chilling crimes in its history. 2 kindergartners, Wakana Takatomo and Jin Sano, both just 5 years old, were found brutally stabbed and left in the countryside. The person responsible was someone they knew, someone they trusted, a mother, from their carpool. Her name was Zheng YONGSHAN. Born in China in 1972, she later adopted the name Miya Taniguchi after marrying a Japanese man and relocating to Nagahama in 2004. By all outward appearances, she was just another parent home navigating the pressures of Japan's tightly knit school community. But behind the closed doors of conformity, Zheng was unraveling. Investigators later revealed Zheng struggled with isolation and deep-seated resentment. She had reportedly felt ostracized by the local mother's circle, a rigid, status-conscious social system many outsiders struggle to penetrate. Though the motive remains blurred, she told police her daughter had been bullied by the very children she murdered. The court, however, found no basis for that claim. That morning, Zheng was scheduled to drive her daughter and the 2 victims to kindergarten as part of a routine carpool. But instead of heading straight to school, she turned onto a rural farm road. Then, with a 20-centimeter sashimi knife she had brought from home, Zheng stabbed the children. Wakana 19 times. Jin 13. After the attack, she discarded their small bodies in separate locations, a roadside ditch, and an irrigation stream before driving nearly 60 kilometers away. She was found hours later in her car, the blood-stained knife still in her possession, and her daughter unharmed by her side. The community was in disbelief. How could a mother commit such a violent act in court? Zheng offered little clarity. She initially claimed she thought she was stabbing sand dolls, not real children. Later, she whispered an apology through tears. "I regret what happened. I'm sorry." A psychological evaluation diagnosed Zheng with schizophrenia and found she was in a state of diminished responsibility at the time of the murders. Prosecutors pushed for the death penalty, citing the brutality of the act. But on October 16, 2007, the court sentenced her to life in prison. It was a decision that divided public opinion, balancing the horror of the crime with the complexities of her mental state. In Japan, where violent crime remains rare, especially crimes involving children, this case triggered a wave of national introspection. Discussions about mental health, social isolation, and the intense societal expectations placed on mothers came to the forefront. Zheng's foreign background also highlighted deeper tensions around integration and belonging in a deeply conformist culture. Today, Zheng YONGSHAN remains behind bars, her name largely erased from the headlines. But for the families of Wakana and Jin, and for a nation shaken by betrayal and grief, the memory of that morning still lingers, proof that even the most routine acts like a school carpool can end in tragedy.